The evening sun bled red over the dusty town of Dry Creek, casting long shadows across the saloon porch, where cowboys leaned on railings with half-empty bottles and full hearts of pride. Inside, laughter mixed with the smell of whiskey, gun oil, and tobacco. A brass lamp swung lazily above the bar, creaking each time the door banged open and the desert wind rolled in. That night, the air was heavier than usual. There was a challenge on the table, one that no man had yet dared to take, and one that promised more than gold, more than whiskey, more than glory. It promised a girl, an Apache girl. They said she was part of a trade gone wrong, part of a deal between outlaws and soldiers that fell apart under gunfire. She had been brought into town weeks ago, silent and proud, never bowing her head, never speaking to anyone. Her eyes burned like flint under stormlight. No one knew her name. Folks just called her the prize. Some men joked, some whispered that she'd rather die than belong to anyone. Still, the challenge stood, scrawled across the barroom wall with a knife point and a promise. If you hit all these bottles, you'll win an Apache girl. Outside the saloon, a row of glass bottles stood on a fence rail, 20 in all, spaced at arm's length, each one filled with dust and sunlight. The wind whistled low, carrying the tune of a faraway harmonica and the distant howl of coyotes. Nobody had ever managed to hit all 20. Most gave up after 10. Some missed on the first shot and walked away laughing to hide their shame. But that night, one man didn't laugh. He sat alone near the back corner, his hat pulled low, his boots coated in trail dust, a revolver resting on the table beside his drink. He wasn't from Dry Creek. No one knew his name either. He'd ridden in that afternoon from the west, his horse lathered and breathing heavy. The bartender had seen men like him before, men who carried silence like a burden and death like a shadow. There was something in his eyes that told you he'd buried too many things to fear anything left above ground. When the talk started about the bottles and the girl, he didn't look up at first. But when one of the local cowhands shouted, "You hit 'em all, stranger, and she's yours," the man's hand paused over his glass. The saloon grew quiet, waiting. The stranger lifted his eyes slowly, and for the first time that night he spoke. "What's the catch?" A murmur ran through the crowd. The sheriff leaned back in his chair, chewing a toothpick. "Ain't no catch," he said. "You hit all 20. You win." Then he added, quieter, "If you don't, you ride out before sunup." The stranger took a long look at the bottles lined up in the red light of sunset. Then he looked at the girl standing near the door, her wrists bound, her head held high. She met his gaze for only a second, but it was enough. He saw defiance in her eyes, not fear. Maybe she hated every man in that room. Maybe she had a reason to. He set his glass down, the sound sharp as a gunshot. "All right," he said. "I'll take your challenge." The room exploded with laughter, bets, and jeers. Coins clattered onto the bar. Some shouted that he was a fool. Others slapped his back and poured him a drink. The girl didn't move. Her face was carved from stone, her dark hair braided down her shoulder. The sheriff motioned toward the door. "Then step outside, cowboy." As the stranger walked out, the night turned cold. The last edge of sunlight cut through the canyon, painting everything in gold and blood. He stood at one end of the fence, the bottles lined up before him like ghosts waiting for their turn. The wind had died, and the only sound was the quiet click as he spun the cylinder of his revolver. 20 shots, said the sheriff, stepping up beside him. "No more, no less." The cowboy nodded once. He drew the gun slowly, steady as the horizon, and aimed at the first bottle. The crowd watched, holding its breath. The shot cracked the stillness. The bottle burst in a cloud of dust and glass. A cheer rose. He moved to the next without a word. Another shot, another bottle gone. 10 bottles fell, then 15. The sound of the shots echoed against the saloon walls, each one sharper than the last, each one dragging the crowd closer to silence. By the time he reached the last bottle, you could hear hearts beating louder than boots. He stopped, wiped the sweat from his brow, and adjusted his grip. The girl was watching him now, eyes fixed on his face. Something unreadable flickered in her expression. Hope, fear, maybe disbelief. The man aimed. For the first time, his hand trembled just a little. The wind rose again, whispering across the desert floor. Somewhere far off, thunder grumbled beyond the hills. The cowboy took a slow breath, the world narrowing down to the barrel of his gun and that one last bottle gleaming in the dark. He pulled the trigger. The sound shattered the silence, but no one cheered this time. The crowd leaned forward, squinting through the smoke. The last bottle was still standing, unbroken. The cowboy lowered his gun slowly, his jaw tightening. The sheriff stepped forward with a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Close," he said. Real close. But before anyone could speak again, the girl did something no one expected. She turned toward the cowboy, her voice quiet but sharp as flint. "You missed on purpose." The words cut through the murmurs like a blade. The sheriff's smile faded. Men looked at each other, unsure. The cowboy didn't answer. He just holstered his revolver and met her gaze with that same steady silence. The crowd waited for laughter, for anger, for anything, but none came. The sheriff's hand drifted toward his holster. "You'd best move along, stranger," he said. "Rules are rules." The cowboy nodded once and started toward his horse. But as he passed the girl, she whispered something only he could hear. He stopped in his tracks, his hand freezing mid-step. Whatever she said changed something in him. His shoulders straightened, and for a brief second his eyes turned to steel. He turned back to the sheriff. "One more shot," he said quietly. "Not for her. For me," the sheriff chuckled. "Ain't no second chances." "Then this one's off the books." He lifted his gun again, aiming not at the bottles this time, but at something beyond them, deep in the shadows near the edge of town. A glint of metal flickered there just for a second, and then his shot rang out. The echo rolled through the canyon like thunder. A man fell from the dark, a rifle clattering beside him. Gasps swept through the crowd. The sheriff's hand froze on his gun. The stranger lowered his revolver, smoke rising from the barrel. "Some challenges," he said softly, "ain't about bottles." And as he turned toward the girl again, her ropes already cut, the wind carried away the dust and the murmurs, leaving only one truth in that small town of Dry Creek. Something had begun that no one could stop now. The cowboy hadn't come for a prize. He'd come for something else, something only she seemed to understand. The night swallowed them both in silence, and somewhere in the dark hills beyond, a new story was waiting to unfold. The cowboy rode out of Dry Creek long after midnight, with the moon hanging low and the sound of the saloon fading behind him. The wind followed, carrying the echo of the last gunshot that had shattered the night's stillness. The Apache girl rode beside him, wrapped in a wool blanket, her wrists free but her silence heavy. She didn't look at him and he didn't ask her name. They rode for miles without a word, past the mesquite trees and over the cracked riverbeds that glimmered under moonlight. The only sounds were the creak of saddle leather and the slow rhythm of hooves against sand. When dawn began to break, the cowboy pulled his horse to a stop near an abandoned corral. The place looked half swallowed by dust, old boards leaning, rusted tools scattered near a well-gone dry. He dismounted and began gathering some brushwood for a fire. The girl stayed mounted, her sharp eyes sweeping across the horizon as if she expected danger to come chasing out of the morning haze. "You can rest," he said quietly, his voice rough from the trail. "Ain't nobody following us yet." Her gaze flicked toward him, wary and untrusting. "Yet," she repeated softly. Then she dismounted, keeping her distance as she crouched by the fire. He handed her a canteen and a small piece of dried jerky. She took neither. "I don't need your food," she said, her English careful but accented. He nodded and took a drink himself. "Didn't say you did." For a long while neither spoke again. The sun climbed higher, washing the desert gold. From somewhere far off a hawk cried. The cowboy sat with his back against a wagon wheel, cleaning his revolver, while the girl traced a finger through the dust, drawing a symbol that looked old, older than the towns or the rails that cut across the land. He watched her hands move, strong but graceful, and wondered what kind of life she'd had before Dry Creek. Finally, he said, "You were right back there. I missed on purpose." She looked up sharply.
"Why?" he shrugged.
"Because no one should win another person like a prize." Her eyes softened for a second, then hardened again. "And yet you took me," he met her gaze. "I took you out of there. That's all." She studied him for a moment, searching for lies, but there were none in his face. "They will come," she said. "The sheriff, the men who took me first, they'll come to take me back, or kill you for stealing me." "I know," he said simply, and kept cleaning the gun. The girl watched him a while longer, then sat back and looked toward the mountains in the distance. "My people live beyond those ridges," she said, "but they will not welcome you. They do not trust white men." "Can't say I blame them," he replied quietly. "Most white men don't deserve trust." There was something in the way he said it that made her glance at him again, as if seeing him differently. "You are not like the others," she said at last. "Maybe not, but I've done my share of wrong," he murmured, his voice low, more to himself than to her. He didn't tell her what kind of wrong. He didn't tell her about the soldiers' camp he'd deserted years ago, or the burned-out village he still saw when he closed his eyes at night. He didn't tell her that the scar on his left shoulder came from the same men who now ruled Dry Creek with shiny badges and dirty hands. Some things were better left buried under dust and silence. As the day wore on, the desert heat grew unbearable. They took shelter in the shade of an old wagon frame. The cowboy dozed lightly, his hat tipped over his face, while the girl sat awake, staring toward the far ridges. Every now and then she'd glance at the horizon, listening. Then near noon she stiffened. "Riders," she whispered. He woke instantly, reaching for his gun. Sure enough, faint plumes of dust were rising from the east. At least 3 horses, maybe more. He stood, squinting against the sun. "They found us quicker than I thought." She rose too, her voice calm but urgent. "We must move. There is a canyon north, deep, narrow. They won't find us if we reach it first." He didn't question how she knew the land so well. He simply nodded. "Then lead the way." They mounted quickly and rode hard. The wind whipped through their hair as they cut across dry plains and scattered brush. The girl's horse moved with natural speed as if it knew the way home. The cowboy followed close behind, the rider's dust growing in the distance but still visible. Each heartbeat seemed louder than the next, each moment tighter than the one before. After what felt like an hour, the land dropped away before them. The canyon stretched below, narrow, rugged, and full of shadows. They descended carefully through a rocky slope, the air cooler in the depths. Once inside, the walls rose high on both sides, hiding them from sight. The girl slowed her horse and finally stopped by a trickle of water seeping from the rocks. "They won't see us here," she said, her breath heavy. He nodded, listening. "You sure they won't track us?" "They might," she admitted. "But this canyon has ghosts. Most men don't come here." The cowboy raised an eyebrow.
"Ghosts?"
She nodded, her eyes far away. "My mother said this place was sacred once. Warriors came here to speak to the spirits before battle. They say the wind here carries the voices of those who never returned." He looked around at the towering walls, the strange echoes that seemed to hum through the air. Maybe it was just the wind, but maybe not. They made camp again, this time near the stream. The girl knelt beside the water, washing the dust from her face. The cowboy watched her reflection ripple across the surface. For the first time since Dry Creek, she looked calm, still wary but calmer. He finally asked, "What's your name?" She hesitated, then said softly, "Tyen." He repeated it under his breath. "Tyen." The word felt strange and beautiful on his tongue. "Means something?" "In my language," she said, "it means new moon." He smiled faintly. "Then it suits you. You got that kind of quiet light." For a heartbeat, something flickered between them. A shared understanding that didn't need words. But it vanished as quickly as it came when a sound echoed from the canyon mouth. Hoofbeats, distant but closing. The cowboy stood, eyes narrowing. "They found us." Tyen's face hardened again. "If they take me back, I won't live long." He checked his revolver. 4 bullets left. Not enough for what was coming. "Then they won't take you." The wind picked up, swirling dust through the canyon. They could see shapes now. Men on horseback, silhouetted against the sun. The sheriff's men, no doubt. Maybe even bounty hunters hired to bring the cowboy in alive or dead. Tyen stepped closer, her hand gripping his arm. "You cannot fight them all," she said. "We can hide deeper. There are paths through the rocks only my people know." He looked at her, then at the approaching riders. "All right," he said. "Lead the way again." They turned their horses and followed a narrow trail between jagged stone. It twisted like a snake, barely wide enough for a man on horseback. Soon the sound of pursuit faded behind them. The air grew cooler, and the canyon opened into a hidden valley, a place untouched by the noise of the world. Wildflowers bloomed near the rocks, and the air smelled of rain, though no storm had passed. "This place," Tyen whispered, "was my mother's home before the raids." The cowboy dismounted, taking in the view. "No wonder men call it haunted. It feels like it belongs to something bigger than us." Tyen looked at him. "It does." As night fell again, they lit a small fire beneath a rocky ledge. He told her of his past, not all of it, but enough. About the army, about the orders he couldn't follow, about walking away from the uniform and the killing. She listened quietly, her eyes reflecting the flames, then she spoke, her voice steady. "You carry ghosts too," he nodded. "More than I'd like." For a moment the wind carried a strange sound through the canyon, half whisper, half sigh. Tyen lifted her head. "Do you hear it?" He did. It wasn't the wind this time. It was a cry, far away but human. Then came the echo of a gunshot, faint, but enough to turn their blood cold. They found us, he said. Tayan's eyes met his, fierce and unyielding. Then this time we don't run. And as the fire crackled low and the shadows deepened across the canyon walls, the cowboy reached for his revolver once more, knowing the night ahead would test every piece of his soul. The silence between them carried the weight of what was coming, and the desert wind began to sing again, soft and restless, as if the ghosts themselves were watching. The gunfire echoed faintly through the canyon walls, breaking the night stillness. The cowboy and Tayan exchanged a look that said everything. Time had run out. The men hunting them were closing in, and the narrow paths that had kept them hidden were now a trap. The cowboy doused the fire with his boot, plunging them into darkness. Only the pale wash of moonlight spilled across the canyon floor, silvering the rocks and the surface of the shallow stream nearby. Tayan moved silently beside him, her eyes sharp and alert. She knew this land better than any map ever could. They're close, she whispered. But they can't track well in the dark. He checked his revolver again, 4 bullets left. His rifle lay strapped behind the horse, but he didn't dare risk the noise of reloading it now. How many do you think? He asked quietly. 5, maybe 6, she replied. One of them rides with a limp. I heard it in his horse before. He gave a faint nod. That kind of detail could mean the difference between living and dying. You've got a hunter's ears, he said. My father taught me to listen before I learned to walk, she murmured. The desert always talks. You just have to know what it's saying. He glanced toward her, studying the outline of her face in the half-light. There was strength in her calmness, the kind that came from surviving too much. Then listen now, he said. Tell me what it says. She tilted her head slightly, her dark braid brushing her shoulder. It says the wind is turning east. They'll come from that side. He moved to higher ground, crouching behind a rock ledge. The moonlight gleamed faintly off the barrel of his revolver. Tayan stayed low, her hand resting on a small knife she'd taken from one of the outlaws days before. The air was dry, heavy with dust and the smell of sage. The horses shifted nervously behind them. A single shot cracked from the ridge. The sound rolled through the canyon like thunder. A bullet hit the stone near his hand, sending chips flying. Tayan didn't flinch. They found us. Yeah, he muttered, and they ain't planning to talk. He fired back once, aiming toward the flash of a muzzle in the distance. The echo bounced off the canyon walls, confusing their position. Then silence again. Too much silence. He knew the trick. The sheriff's men were spreading out, trying to corner them. Tayan touched his shoulder lightly. There's another way out. A tunnel in the rocks, just beyond that ridge. He looked where she pointed. The opening was narrow, half hidden by a fallen boulder. Where does it lead? To the high plain, she said. If we reach it before sunrise, they won't catch us. He gave a short nod. Then let's move! They led the horses quietly through the shadows, every step measured. The path wound tighter, the walls pressing in until the canyon felt like a stone throat ready to close around them. Behind, faint voices echoed, men cursing, boots striking gravel. Halfway through the passage, one of the horses snorted and stumbled. A rock clattered loudly. The cowboy froze. The noise bounced like a bell in the quiet. Shouts erupted behind them, followed by more gunfire. Run, he said. They sprinted, the tunnel curving sharply before opening into a wide plain lit by moonlight. Tayan swung into her saddle with ease, urging her horse forward. The cowboy followed, glancing back only once to see the flicker of lanterns chasing through the canyon mouth. By dawn, they reached the edge of a small plateau overlooking a dry river valley. The sun was just touching the horizon, painting the land in crimson light. Tayan dismounted, her chest heaving. They won't stop, she said. They'll chase until one of us is dead. He tied his horse to a low branch and wiped the sweat from his brow. Then we make them stop. She turned to face him. You can't fight the whole town. I've fought worse, he said quietly. And some of them owe me more than they remember. Her eyes narrowed. What do you mean? He looked out toward the horizon, where Dry Creek lay hidden behind the ridges. The sheriff wasn't always wearing a badge. Used to ride with the same outfit I did, before things went bad. We robbed trains, ran guns, even took contracts for the army when they didn't want their hands dirty. But he wanted more: gold, power, land. I wanted out. Tayan's voice was soft. And he didn't let you go? He made sure no one ever walked away clean. He paused, jaw tightening. I left him once. Guess he never forgave me for it. She watched him carefully. So this isn't just about me. He met her gaze. No, but maybe you're the piece he didn't plan on. The morning wind picked up, scattering dust across the plain. Somewhere below, coyotes barked. Tyan turned toward the hills. "There's a place my people used long ago. Caves where they kept food and water for the dry seasons. We can rest there." He nodded. "Lead on." They traveled through the heat of the day, the sun burning down hard. By afternoon, they reached the caves, small openings carved into the red cliffs. The air inside was cool and still. Tyan gathered dry brush for another fire, while the cowboy tended to the horses. For a while, the world seemed to pause, but danger always lingered close like a shadow that never quite left. He could feel it in the stillness, in the way the wind stopped suddenly, in the way even the birds seemed to fall silent. He broke the quiet first. "Your people, they'll take you back?" She hesitated. "If they believe me alive? If they believe I am still one of them?" "You don't sound sure." She looked into the flames. "When they took me, I was meant to be married to a warrior. He thought I betrayed him to the soldiers. He won't forgive easily." The cowboy said nothing. He understood the weight of pride and the cost of misunderstanding. "Then what happens if we go there?" She looked up, her eyes unreadable. "If I go alone, they might let me live. If you come with me, they'll kill you before you speak." He gave a tired smile. "Wouldn't be the first time someone tried." She almost smiled too, but her voice stayed firm. "You don't understand. They don't forgive strangers who carry guns." He looked down at his revolver. "Maybe I'll need it before this is over." That night, as the stars burned bright across the desert sky, the cowboy sat awake while Tyan slept. He thought of Dry Creek, of the faces that once called him brother. He could still hear their laughter from the saloon, see the gold glinting in their teeth. But he also remembered the screams, the raid they led into a native village years ago, when the sheriff had promised it was just another job. That was the night everything inside him broke. Now fate had brought him face to face with what he'd helped destroy. The girl beside him was a reminder of it all. The innocent lives, the burned homes, the people caught between greed and pride. He looked at her sleeping by the fire, her face peaceful for once, and knew he couldn't let her fall back into the same hands. But before dawn, a sound reached his ears. Hooves again, many this time. Not the sheriff's men. Different rhythm, different voices calling in a tongue he didn't know. Tyan woke instantly, eyes wide. "My people," she whispered. She ran outside the cave, her figure glowing pale in the rising light. The cowboy followed, hand near his gun. A group of riders appeared on the ridge, painted horses, spears glinting, faces stern and proud. One of them shouted her name. She turned back to him. "Stay here," she said. "Let me speak to them." He watched as she approached them, her voice strong but pleading. They surrounded her, arguing in their language. Then one of them looked toward the cave, toward him, and shouted angrily. The cowboy stepped out, his hands raised. The warriors tensed, weapons lifting. Tyan moved between them, shouting something that made them pause. For a moment, silence hung between the two sides, the past and the present facing each other under the same desert sun. The cowboy could see it in their eyes. Hate, grief, confusion. He couldn't blame them. Finally, the oldest among them spoke. His voice was like the wind through stone, low and cold. Tyan translated quietly. "He says you carry the blood of their dead on your hands." The cowboy didn't deny it. "Maybe I do," he said softly. "But I'm trying to make it right." The elder studied him, unmoving. Then he spoke again, slower this time. Tyan hesitated before translating. "He says the land remembers everything. It doesn't forgive easily." "I'm not asking it to forgive," the cowboy said. "Just to let us live long enough to set things straight." The old man stared at him for a long time. Then he gestured to the others. They lowered their weapons but did not relax. Tyan exhaled shakily, her eyes shining with relief and warning at once. "They'll let you stay for now," she said. "But when the sun sets again, they'll decide your fate." The cowboy nodded, his jaw tight. "Then we'd better make the most of daylight." Far behind them, across the desert, a faint dust cloud rose again. The sheriff's riders, relentless as vengeance. The past and present were about to collide, and neither mercy nor bullets would stop what was coming next. The sun dropped low behind the red hills, casting long shadows across the Apache Valley. The air hung heavy with heat and dread. Tyan stood outside the cave, her hair catching the dying light, while the cowboy watched from a distance, his heart restless. He could feel that the world around them was shifting, the fragile trust of her people, the rising dust beyond the horizon, the promise of reckoning drawing closer with every gust of wind. Somewhere out there, the sheriff's men were still riding, closing the gap mile by mile. Inside the camp, the Apache tribe moved quietly, but with purpose. Warriors sharpened blades by the fires and elders murmured prayers in their native tongue. Even the children stayed silent, sensing the tension that threaded through the air like a live wire. The cowboy knew they hadn't accepted him. Not really. They tolerated him because Tyen had asked them to, and because the elder had agreed to wait until sundown to decide his fate. But in their eyes he saw judgment. He saw memory. To them he wasn't a man. He was every bullet, every torch, every broken promise they had ever suffered. Tyen approached him, carrying a small pouch tied with leather string. "Medicine," she said softly. "In case you are hurt again." He took it, unsure what to say. "You really think I'll live long enough to use it?" "You will," she replied, her voice calm. "If you listen." He gave a small nod, pocketing the pouch. "And if your people don't decide to hang me by sunrise?" She hesitated, then looked past him toward the desert. "They won't," she said. "If they believe you mean what you said." He leaned against a rock, crossing his arms. "And what do you believe?" Her eyes met his, steady and unreadable. "I believe a man can carry ghosts for years until he decides to face them." Before he could answer, a sudden cry echoed from the edge of the valley. A young scout came riding fast, his voice cutting through the dusk. Tyen turned sharply as the riders gathered. The scout's horse stopped in a cloud of dust, its flanks wet with sweat. "White riders," he shouted. "Many, coming from the east." The camp erupted into motion. Men leapt to their feet, grabbing rifles, bows, and knives. The elder raised his staff and barked orders, his voice low but commanding. Tyen turned to the cowboy, her face pale. "It's him," she said. "The sheriff." The cowboy felt his stomach tighten. He'd expected it, but not this soon. "How far?" "An hour," the scout said. "Maybe less." The elder's sharp gaze turned toward the cowboy. "You brought this trouble here." He didn't deny it. "Maybe," he said. "But I can end it too." The old man studied him for a moment, then spoke through Tyen. "You cannot fight an army with one gun." "I don't need an army," he said quietly. "Just a reason." That night fell hard and fast, swallowing the valley in darkness. The fires burned low, throwing red light across the stone walls. From the ridge above, Tyen watched the horizon. Faint sparks of lanterns flickered in the distance like fireflies, men on horseback moving in formation. The sheriff's posse. They weren't hiding their approach. They wanted to be seen. The cowboy checked his revolver, reloading the last of his bullets. His hands were steady, but inside something twisted tight. He wasn't afraid of dying. He'd made peace with that long ago. What unsettled him was the thought of history repeating itself, the innocent paying again for what others had done. He felt Tyen's presence beside him. She held a bow in her hands, her movements practiced, her face calm but determined. "You can still leave," she said. "They will take me back, not you." He shook his head. "They'll kill you for running, or worse." "You know that." Her voice trembled, barely audible. "Then why stay?" "You don't owe me anything." He looked at her, his jaw set. "Maybe not, but I owe the world something better than what I've been." Below them, the warriors began positioning themselves along the canyon walls. The elder moved among them, blessing each one with smoke from a burning herb. Tyen's brother, tall, proud, and cold-eyed, watched the cowboy with silent hatred. "If he fails us," he said to her in their tongue, "his blood will feed the sand." Tyen answered him with the same calm strength that had carried her through captivity. "Then let the sand decide," she said. The first gunshot came just before midnight, a crack of thunder that rolled through the valley. The sheriff's men had reached the edge of the canyon and opened fire into the dark, hoping to draw out movement. The Apache warriors held their fire, waiting for the right moment. The cowboy crouched low behind a rock, his revolver ready. The night pulsed with danger. The smell of smoke, the hiss of bullets cutting through air, the cries of horses echoing like ghosts. The sheriff's voice rang out from the darkness. "You think you can hide in there, boy? I taught you better than that." The cowboy's blood ran cold. He knew that voice, the same one that had once laughed beside him around campfires, the same one that had ordered the burning of villages, the same one that haunted his dreams. He rose just enough to see the glint of metal far below, the sheriff's badge catching moonlight. Tyen looked at him. "It's him?" He nodded once. "It's him." "Then you can't go down there alone." He met her eyes, and for a heartbeat neither spoke. Then he said quietly, "I already am." Before she could stop him, he slipped away into the shadows, moving down the slope like smoke. The canyon twisted below, lit by the flashes of gunfire. The sheriff's men were spread out, searching with torches. The cowboy knew their rhythm, the way they moved, the way they thought. He used to be one of them. He reached the bottom, ducking behind a fallen boulder. 2 riders passed close by, their horses snorting in the dark. He waited until they turned, then fired once. The shot dropped the first man clean from the saddle. The second swung his rifle around, but a silent arrow from above pierced his shoulder before he could fire. Tyann had followed. The cowboy looked up at the ridge, and she met his gaze. They didn't need words now. The battle had begun. For the next few minutes, chaos swallowed the canyon. Bullets tore through the night. Horses screamed and bolted into the dark. The Apache warriors struck from above, using the land itself as their weapon. The sheriff's men tried to push forward, but they were trapped in narrow ground. Then the sheriff himself stepped into view. Tall, broad-shouldered, his hat tilted low. His coat glistened with dust and sweat, but his smile was the same as ever. "You always had a soft heart," he shouted. "Should have stayed where you belonged." The cowboy stepped from cover, gun raised. "I did once," he said. "Till I saw what kind of man I was following." The sheriff laughed, the sound cold and cruel. "You think you're better now? You killed more than any of us. You just ran before the count was done." The cowboy's finger tightened on the trigger, but before he could fire, a rifle shot from somewhere above struck the rock near his head. Tyann screamed his name. The sheriff used the moment to duck behind a horse, drawing his own revolver. The air exploded with gunfire again. Dust and smoke choked the valley. The cowboy fired twice, hitting one of the sheriff's men square in the chest. Then something heavy struck his shoulder, spinning him to the ground. Pain flared white-hot. Tyann ran down the slope, arrows flying from her bow. She reached him, her hands trembling as she tried to drag him behind cover. "They're too many," she whispered. He gritted his teeth, blood running down his arm. "Not for long." From the ridge above, the Apache warriors began their final push, their war cries cutting through the smoke. The sheriff shouted for his men to fall back, but they were already surrounded. The cowboy raised his head, his vision blurring. He saw the sheriff climbing onto a rock, his revolver gleaming. Their eyes met across the chaos. Teacher and student, both ghosts of a past that refused to die. The sheriff aimed first, smiling. The cowboy steadied his hand, breathing through the pain. For a long moment, everything went silent. The wind stopped. Even the echoes faded. 2 guns fired at once, and the world exploded into light and dust as the story of Dry Creek reached the edge of its reckoning, but not yet its end. The smoke hung low over the canyon, thick and bitter. The echo of the last gunfire rolled across the cliffs and then faded into silence. For a long moment, nothing moved. The only sound was the wind pushing dust through the rocks. Tyann knelt beside the cowboy, her hands shaking as she pressed against the wound in his shoulder. His breathing was rough but steady, his revolver still gripped loosely in one hand. Not far away, the sheriff lay on the ground, his hat fallen beside him, his gun resting just beyond reach. The battle was over. The desert had decided who would live to see another dawn. The Apache warriors began to gather among the fallen, checking the wounded and reclaiming their arrows. The night was quiet again, except for the crackling of small fires and the soft voices of men and women tending to their own. Tyann turned the cowboy's face toward her, her eyes filled with something between fear and relief. "You're alive," she whispered. He gave a faint smile. "Hurts enough to prove it." She tore a strip of cloth from her dress and tied it tight around his arm. "You lost a lot of blood." He winced but didn't pull away. "Lost more before. Always find a way to keep walking." Her voice softened. "You don't have to keep running anymore." He looked around at the canyon, at the men who had fought and died to defend it, at the rising dawn turning the rocks to gold. "No," he said quietly. "Maybe not." A group of warriors carried the sheriff's body closer, laying him beside the others. The elder walked over, his face unreadable. He looked at the cowboy for a long moment before speaking in his native tongue. Tyann translated softly. "He says the land has taken what it was owed." The cowboy nodded. "Then maybe it'll let the rest of us live." The elder studied him a little longer, then reached down and placed a small handful of dust over the sheriff's chest. "The wind will carry his spirit," Tyann said. "It carries all of them." The cowboy lowered his eyes. "Then let it carry mine too when it's time." By midday, the valley was quiet again. The wounded were treated and the dead buried with care. The cowboy sat near the stream, his arm bound, watching Tyann as she spoke with her people. The men who had once looked at him with suspicion now watched him differently, still wary, but with something closer to respect. He hadn't fought for gold or pride. He'd fought to protect what he'd once helped destroy. That meant something. Tayen walked back toward him, her face calmer now. "They've decided you can stay until you heal," she said. "After that you'll be free to go," he smiled faintly. "And what if I don't?" She sat beside him. "Then maybe you'll have to find another reason to stay." For the first time in years, he felt a strange peace settle over him. The noise of war and guilt that had followed him across miles of desert began to fade, replaced by the steady rhythm of the river and the quiet breath of the wind. He looked at Tayen, at the strength in her eyes, and realized she was no longer just the girl he'd freed. She was the one who'd freed him too. Days passed and the desert began to heal. The scars of battle remained, but life returned to the valley. The children played again. The men hunted and repaired what had been broken. Tayen spent her days gathering herbs for the wounded, and at night she sat by the fire telling stories of her people, stories of endurance, of storms that passed but never erased the land beneath them. The cowboy listened quietly, his arm slowly mending. Sometimes he helped mend saddles or fetch water. Other times he just walked through the canyon, feeling the sun on his back and the quiet weight of something like redemption. He had no home, no family waiting anywhere. But for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like a man running from ghosts. One evening, as the sky turned violet and the first stars appeared, Tayen found him sitting by the same stream where they had first rested after escaping Dry Creek. She handed him a small carved pendant, a smooth stone bound with leather. "It's for protection," she said. "My mother used to wear one." He turned it over in his hand. "And what protects you?" She smiled softly. "The same thing that protects the desert. It bends but never breaks." He looked at her for a long moment, then tied the pendant around his neck. "You should keep it," he said. "I already did," she replied. "By giving it to you." That night he couldn't sleep. The fire crackled low and the stars seemed endless above the canyon. He thought of the sheriff, of the men buried in the sand, of the choices that had led him here. He knew the past could never be undone, but maybe if he lived right, it could be outweighed. When morning came, he found Tayen near the edge of the valley, gazing toward the open plains. "The soldiers will come," she said. "They always do. They'll hear what happened here." He nodded. "Then they'll need someone to mislead them." "You'd do that?" she asked quietly. "I owe you more than words," he said. "If they find this place, they'll burn it again. I can lead them the wrong way, buy time." Her eyes filled with worry. "You might not come back," he smiled. "I've been gone a long time already." She didn't try to stop him. She just reached out and touched his good arm, her fingers light but steady. "Then go with the wind," she said. "And remember what you told me. A man can stop running." He looked at her one last time, then mounted his horse. The valley stretched out behind him, quiet and golden. Ahead lay the endless desert, the same road that had once brought him only regret, but now it carried something else, purpose. He turned in the saddle, tipping his hat toward Tayen and the people who had taught him what redemption meant without ever asking for it. As he rode east, the wind rose behind him, swirling through the canyon like a song. Tayen watched until he disappeared into the sunlight. Somewhere deep inside, she knew he would not be coming back soon, but she also knew he wasn't truly gone. The land would remember him, the man who had come with a gun and left with a soul that finally found peace. In the weeks that followed, the soldiers came searching, but they found nothing. The canyon's trails led nowhere. The wind erased every track. Tayen and her people rebuilt, planting new crops near the river and carving fresh symbols on the canyon walls, marks of survival, of new beginnings. And far across the desert, where the horizon met the sky, a lone rider moved beneath the fading sun, his shadow stretching long and thin across the sand. He rode not for gold, not for glory, but for something quieter, a promise kept, a life reclaimed. The wind carried his scent back toward the valley, mingling it with dust and memory. When the night came again, the stars glimmered above the land that had seen too much pain but still refused to die. Tayen stood at the mouth of the canyon, her face lifted to the sky, whispering a prayer not of mourning but of hope. Somewhere out there, she knew the cowboy was still riding. Maybe one day he'd return, or maybe he'd vanish like all the old legends do, swallowed by the desert that raised them. But his story, like the wind, would keep moving, retold around campfires, whispered across saloon tables, remembered in every tale of the old frontier. The cowboy who refused to claim a prize, who faced his ghosts and chose mercy instead of pride. In the end, the desert gave him what no man had before, a second chance. And for Tyann, that was enough to believe that even in a world full of dust and fire, redemption could still bloom like wildflowers after rain.